So this guitar is probably the most interesting release that Gibson's done all year long, and definitely my favorite. Here's why. Hey gang, your old pal Clay here, Mountain Music Exchange, and today I have a real gem of a guitar here I'm pretty fond of, and have always been pretty fond of the design. If you happen to have seen any of the older store videos, you'll know that I'm a pretty big aficionado, a fan, if you will, of a black Gibson Les Paul Custom, and here we are with yet another one today. So, this is the all-new Gibson 70's Les Paul Custom. And I'm going to tell you why I think it's probably the best of these, like, sort of era guitars that Gibson USA has been putting out. Okay, so, first of all, this is a Gibson USA, not a Gibson Custom Shop Custom. This year is the celebration of the 50th year of Gibson being in Nashville, and up until about 2004, all Les Paul Customs were made in the Gibson USA factory, along with like the standards, the studios, etc., so on, specials, what have you. And these are sort of like hearkening back to that era when Gibson Les Paul Customs were made right alongside the rest, and it has era-specific features that I think none of the other sort of decade guitars have. Here in a second, I'll explain that, but here in a second, we'll go top to bottom over the whole thing and kind of give you a rundown of what I mean when I say that, right? But this one, for example, you take like the 70's Flying V, for example, right? And really what you're going for with that guitar, what I think Gibson is going for with that guitar, is a vibe, right? They're going for the sort of overall general feeling experience of what that guitar entailed at that time or what it means to us now, right? You still have like the sort of narrow headstock. You don't have the volute in the back. A few other small things. You do have some binding on the neck on those models, which is sort of reminiscent of that era depending on what year you grabbed one. And overall, and the same with the 80's, right? With the 80's Flying V, for example, right? You have a guitar that's made of all mahogany, when in the 80's, they were made of alder and maple. So you're just capturing sort of a vibe, the no pick guard in the 80's, for example, right? But with this guitar, you're still more capturing a vibe than a very specific era or a specific year release. But it does come with features that really, really harken back to that time, more so than the others that I just talked about. For example, you do have the three-piece maple neck here with volute at the base of your headstock, and that in and of itself is more, I think, feature-laden to the specific era than the other guitars that I just talked about, right? You also have a three-piece maple top. Now, I'm going to show you some B-roll footage of a guitar that I got a video of before we sold it, but we did have a wine red one here that I really, really wanted to use to show you guys, but instead we're going to have to use this black one to sort of get the vibe and the point across, right? But so some of the glamour shots that I'll be showing you are of the wine red version that we had, so I can kind of get the point across of, you know, the three-piece top, the three-piece neck, that sort of thing, right? And there are a couple of reasons I actually prefer this specific configuration more so than your classic era 57 Les Paul Custom, right? Or even something like a 59, right? There are things that were added, features that were changed. Some of it was probably due to cost cutting. There's no reason in acting like it wasn't, right? But a maple neck is stronger than a mahogany neck. With the volute, you've got it even a little bit stronger than that. Now, I'm not going to do a drop test on this, but I will tell you that I do believe that it is going to be sturdier in the event that the unthinkable could happen with your guitar and it leaves the strap, right? And a three-piece maple top definitely was probably a cost-cutting measure. I don't think there's any structural rigidity that was improved by having that top on this, right? But it is era-specific here, and when you're talking about solid colors, and these come in black, buttercream, sunburst, and wine red. When you're talking about solid colors, that really doesn't matter anyway. So, you know, it's just a visual aesthetic thing. I don't think it's going to change the tone any to have an extra piece of maple up here in the middle, but your mileage may vary. Now, speaking of, this also has really cool posi lock strap buttons, which I'm a huge fan of. One, because it's that era specific. That is, again, another feature that Gibson gave us with this guitar that is more era specific than the other sort of decade tributes that have come before. So they really decided to go the extra mile in making this, I think. It doesn't harken back to one specific year in the 70s. The neck profile says that it's a 70s profile. I would probably call this something more like a modified 60s slim taper. It starts out very slim up here. Your nut is the standard width, 1.7 inches, 1.69 inches, something like that. And the taper is a little different, so it does feel a little bigger down here, which is sort of common in the 70s. But I would say that it still retains all in all like a slim taper kind of vibe to it, right? You get calibrated T-type pickups here. These are the same pickups right now that you'll find in something like an ES335, right? Alnico 5 magnets, but a relatively low or moderate output in the 7.5 range, something like that. Gold hardware, of course, and you get witch hat knobs, which again I think is the perfect harkening back to that decade. A friend of mine has the 70s Flying V, and he went out of his way to grab the witch hat knobs to put on it just to complete the visual aesthetic, because otherwise it kind of looked a lot like a 67 but with pickup rings, right? But anyway, of course you still get your three-way toggle switch, CTS pods, orange drop capacitors, all that good stuff. Anyway, back to these strap locks, or strap buttons, rather. These are not locks. But I will tell you, in my experience with these, on this particular guitar, they work. Like you can actually, it grabs the strap in just such a way, when you pull it up, it hangs and it sticks. Now, I would still probably recommend using like a soft strap lock if you want to keep this aesthetic. What I mean by that is one of those sort of like rubber strap locks that goes over top of this and over top of your strap, for example, right? But they hold really well. I like it. Has real ebony fingerboard here, mother of pearl inlays, big split diamond mother of pearl inlay there with your mother of pearl Gibson logo. So it is a very ornate guitar. I think this is the peak of what I would probably consider ornate on one of these. And the reason I say that is anything else to me looks almost too out of its way, or maybe even a little gaudy, right? But this is just dressed up enough that you can play any genre of music that you want, and it fits. It works with country music, it works with pop, it works with funk, it works with heavy metal, especially heavy metal, but it works with everything. And that's really something I like about this. Now, there are a couple of somewhat controversial topics here I've seen on forums regarding stuff like the binding, for example, right? So you do have 5-ply binding here on the headstock, which is accurate to the normal Les Paul Custom. Back here, you have 3-ply binding. On a custom shop or traditional Les Paul Custom, you would have 5-ply binding back here as well. Now, that being said, I get the ire of it all. I get it. But the binding is still thick back here. It's thick, white binding, and it looks really good regardless. And to be honest with you, until I dug in on this, even as big a fan of a Les Paul Custom as I am, I really didn't realize that we were being skimped a little bit on the binding, right? To me, it just looks good. And same with the front. Normally you have 7-ply binding here, but again, we are given 5-ply binding. But once again, like to me, it just stands out the way that it should. It's thick enough binding that it doesn't look like we've been slotted at all, right? And I'm sure to some extent Gibson probably wants to keep the top end specs sort of in that range where if that's really what you want, you're gonna go pay an extra $1,600 and get a custom shop custom, right? And I think that's another reason that we get this 70s custom rather than like a Gibson custom, we'll say proper, although I think this is perfectly proper myself, a Gibson custom proper back down to the USA line. I think that is just, we just get to keep our OG specs up there, and then we get this sort of experimental design here. And I think a little bit of that also comes from it's a weird twofold thing. I think it comes from both the love and the hatred of the Norland era, right? Where we have cork sniffer type folks, or we have aficionados of Les Pauls who genuinely believe that golden era, late 50s, early through 1960 Les Paul is the pinnacle of all Les Pauls and will never be beaten ever, right? And then we have people who grew up with and listen to music. This is probably the category I fall into, from guys who played a lot of Norland era Les Pauls. Ace Frehley, Randy Rhoads, Zakk Wylde. Those guys are all playing Norland era Les Pauls with maple necks, 3-piece tops, all the ugly specs, right? But they're making great music with these, right? So I think that's a lot of the reason that this guitar ended up at this price point at $39.99. Is because there's this weird sort of dichotomy between people that love that Norland era stuff, like me, and people that don't really, still to this day, don't think much of it. They think it was like, you know, a black eye in the history of Gibson and that sort of thing. But you will not hear that from me. I'm not a detractor of this era of guitar. I think this specific guitar plays phenomenally, and I think it sounds really good too. The calibrated T-type pickups really blend well with the tone woods here that we have. One thing I do miss, and I realize that we're not going to get it probably on a USA model, right? But we're not getting that cool medallion. But a Norland era Les Paul wouldn't have had that medallion anyway, so it doesn't really matter. This also comes with sort of the standard original series guitar case that you would get from Gibson in general, right? With the brown Tolex, the sort of like pinkish purplish interior. It's a really nice case. I've always been a big fan of these cases from the 90s on. I know I'm probably showing my age a little bit with that, but it is not the Lifton case that you would see now with either, you know, the really, really nice like velvet pink interior or the goldenrod interior on the black ones that you would get with a custom now, right? It's not that same case, but it is one, a perfectly suitable case, and two, a case that I think harkens back to the time when these were coming out from the USA shop in those cases. So, I've rambled on enough about this. Without further ado, let's go ahead and give this thing a run for its money, see how it plays, see how it sounds, let you guys hear some different tones. We're going to do clean, we're going to do dirty. Tell me what you think in the comments below. But before I get into that, let me remind you we have a brand new collection of swag coming out. These are all new shirt designs from the MME X Matt Bartley collection. We have teamed up with artist Matt Bartley to produce 3 new t-shirt designs that I think you guys are really going to enjoy. We've listened to your feedback in the comments here, and I think you're going to really like what we've got to offer. So check out the new designs, and don't forget to go grab those at mountainmusicexchange.com, where you'll be entered to win one of 2 guitars in our guitar giveaway that'll be drawn live on Black Friday. That's November 28th, 2025. All right, gang. So this is still, and will always be, the Ebony Les Paul Custom 70s from Gibson, all new to the range. Looks like this is going to be a mainstay, and I'm really happy about that, honestly. If it means that we are able to get, and at $39.99, I realize the world has gone mad for me to say that that is an affordable price, right? But it is an attainable price comparatively when you look at a similarly spec'd or similarly aesthetic custom shop version for $5,600, right? We are well below that. That's a Les Paul Studio difference in price, right? So it has been dropped quite a bit, and the specs are all there and they're all right to the era, and I'm really excited about that. I hope you are too. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below about the specs, about the sound, about anything you want to talk about. I'm waiting in the comments to chat with you about it. But that's going to have us on this one, gang. Make sure to check us out at mountainmusicexchange.com, where you can enter to win our 1 of 2 guitar giveaways. And check us out on our social media. As you can see around us here, all the stuff, all the things. Gang, that's got it. I'm Clay. You rock. And wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, make it loud. See you, gang.